on to the big story that's driving the day today. Yesterday, Home Secretary Suella Braverman gave a speech at the UN that was roundly denounced as ignorant, racist, xenophobic, all the words, basically. She said that the United Nations Convention on Refugees needed ripping up and starting again because it has got to the point where the system is being gamed by people with no right to refugee status and who are claiming asylum based on merely being discriminated against as opposed to persecuted for being gay or being a woman. And most people who are refugees simply aren't. Some of them might be, she said, but just not. Darren, does she have any good factual basis to say any of that? Can you bear to speak?
I think you've just articulated my thought process. And my
listeners on podcast, Darren has just got his head in his hands and has been shaking it slowly.
I listen, I'm smiling. It's ironic, smiling because I'm kind of proud, Susie, of our Daily Mirror's front page today, because sometimes, just like yourself, we need to cut through the nonsense, I'll call it, and say it as it is. And the rhetoric is poisonous. It's no different from the kind of rhetoric that has become Suella Braverman's trademark over a sustained period of time. We've had the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, doing the rounds on TV trying to back Braverman up, but everybody sees that speech yesterday in America, in the febrile territory of America, knee-deep in, obviously, campaigning for the White House, where Donald Trump has still a huge supporter base with the politics of division. And I tweeted about Braverman last night. She is even more dangerous because she's weaponizing her background in an attempt to divide us. She's from a Kenyan Mauritian background. She's in a government led by someone whose family came from India. And she's stoking up the fear and the hatred of Enoch Powell from the 60s and the 70s. And people mistakenly believe it because she can't be misrepresenting the truth. Look at her heritage. And that's what makes her even more dangerous than the likes of Enoch Powell. And, we haven't even got to the kind of thing that gay people will face as a result of what she has said yesterday. It's poisonous. It's dangerous. It's pandering to the far right ideology that a lot of people grew up with and recognize having to watch their backs because of. And I think our front page today really does stand out in a sea of people kind of sitting on the sidelines or ignoring it altogether. I look at some of the other media outlets, they're not really giving it or called it what it is, but it is poisonous. It is trying to divide us, and I hope it does not succeed.
Yeah, now it's of course, people from ethnic minorities are as capable of being racist as anybody else, as much as they are capable of not being racist as anybody else. But they're not in a minority in every country just because they may be in a minority in this country. And there is certainly lots of sort of interracial racism as well. It's just a horrible species, human beings sometimes. Paul says, Braverman is just positioning herself for a stab at the Tory party leadership, appealing to the boggle-eyed Tory right wing. Paul, you're very prescient. I'm getting to that point in a minute. Go away. I don't want to talk about it yet. You're interfering with my script. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think Braverman's got a point? Do you think that people are gaming the refugee system? Do you think that it is something we need to think about and talk about again? Because the world has changed since 1952 when that Convention on Human Rights was written. Philip says, such a foul person as Braverman should never represent Britain. Her views reflect the right-wing extremist attitudes in the Tory party, not the electorate of the UK. We're going to get to that point later as well, honestly. Now, it's not great to be discriminated against, of course, for any reason. But in this country, whatever our experience of discrimination in any way, it's tempered, whoever you are and whatever the discrimination might be, by the rule of law, by democracy, by the fact that you do have the right to kick up a fuss. But try being a woman in Afghanistan, Suella Braverman. Try being gay and in Saudi Arabia. Try being of the wrong religion across pretty much most of the planet, actually. You would all want to leave it would seem far worse than the discrimination, than mere discrimination. If you were locked up for 10 years because of who you loved, if you were denied education because of your genitals, or if you were sent to re-education camps because of what you had faith in. Discrimination is persecution on most of the planet. It isn't always necessarily the same kind of persecution in this country, isn't quite the same. And I suppose that's, Darren, where some will say Suella's actually aiming at this sort of the socially conservative with a small c people in this country, a majority, frankly, who feel perhaps their kindness is being taken advantage of by those whose gayness or beliefs or gender. It doesn't seem so bad, really, from our perspective. We think, well, we want to come here because you're gay. Well, that's just silly. It's not. You're not going to get killed because you're a woman. You don't have to do that, because our experience in this country is that doesn't lead to 10-year jail sentences.
Do you know what Suella's trying to do? And I mentioned Enoch Powell a bit earlier, and to me, everything about her playbook screams Enoch Powell, because what she's trying to do is suggest that people should be afraid of what they're going to lose, of what people coming into this country are going to do, how it's going to impact on them. And there are lots of people who get swept away by this mistaken belief that people come to this country and they are handed stuff on a silver platter, and they come here because of that. And there are so many untrue narratives that have been allowed to ferment because of Suella Braverman's rhetoric. And if you look at the numbers, for example, we take fewer refugees, people, I'm going to call them people. We take fewer people than France, than Germany, than Turkey. Turkey hosts 3.6 million people, right? Migrants, the largest population in the world. 3.6 million. Do you know what's next? Do you know who's next? Iran. 3.4. And, you talk about those oppressive countries. Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, places, as you rightly say, where all of those different demographics, whether you're gay, whether you're a woman, there are issues in all of those countries. She knows all of this. But she
also knows that if, for example, someone is fleeing Afghanistan, whether you're a woman, whether you're a child, whether you're a young man who doesn't want to be fighting for the Taliban, whatever it might be, the reason you're fleeing Afghanistan is because Britain ran away from Afghanistan, along with the Americans and the coalition, and left them to it. And so therefore, a lot of what we have in terms of a refugee crisis or problem, whether I don't really want to call it a crisis, it's just people moving about and trying to be alive. It's because of what we have not done, as opposed to, and the massive pull attraction of getting 13 quid a week and living in a bedsit, which frankly no one's going to move across the world to do. It's the fact that we have interfered with or destroyed or just ignored other countries and their problems. We could try and fix those problems elsewhere. It could help. We could offer advice and expertise. We could give aid, but that's all being cut too. And so she does know that this stuff it's partly on us, and it's our responsibility, doesn't she?
Yeah, listen, and you're right to talk about that background as well, because you think about what we have not done. You also think about what we have done as well over many hundreds of years. The other countries that we've gone into with impunity and plundered and left in a state of chaos and disarray, and our foreign policy for years of arrogance. And I think a lot about the context within which she is trying to use language of invasion and stoke fear. And all of the things that you just mentioned are so important for people to understand. Do you know what, Susan? I remember when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, and I wrote a column saying that it wasn't a triumph for diversity, because real diversity is about fairness. It's about making life better for other people. Not the kind of, I don't even want to call it a debate, because really this should get what the Daily Mirror has given it today: condemnation. This isn't a debate. The issue of whether we want to help people live, as you were rightly saying, rather than, oh my goodness, should we be afraid of them? Are they going to come and steal us? I grew up, Susie, around that. Bloody black people, they're going to come here and take our jobs and take our women. I grew up with that. And 4 decades, nearly 5 decades later, I'm still hearing it. And I'm hearing it from somebody who's weaponizing her heritage to do it. It's her, Sunak, Kwasi Kwarteng, Kemi Badenoch, all of them in different ways, different rapping, same message. It's all the politics of hate. And I don't believe in this society that we live in right now that we should be attacking people who don't look like us. We should be all in it together against a government that's left this country in ashes after 13 years. They've got nothing left, so they try to turn us against each other.
Yeah. Now, I think it's what one of the some of our earlier commenters were saying here. Really, it's part of a rather naked bid for Suella to have the Tory leadership position herself for that, because it is shortly going to be vacant, isn't it? It doesn't matter what happens here. I think Professor Sir John Curtis was saying elsewhere this morning that the immigration issue isn't why the Tories are in trouble, although it's not helping. But they could start rewriting the UN Convention on Human Rights. They could even get some international support for it. It's not going to save them. They're not going to be re-electable on this basis. But what this had done, this speech yesterday, is to get Suella on the front pages. It's got us some approving leaders in the Times and the Telegraph. It's even got a glowing write-up in the New York Post saying, "Oh, thank goodness someone has said what no one else will say." And there is a good reason for all this, of course. I mean, this is Suella's sort of rather obvious bid to be positioning herself as, the red-blooded, have some raw meat people kind of candidate for the next, for the base, really, candidate for the next leadership race.
Yeah, it's a very naked attempt, and she was asked about that yesterday in America, and she didn't deny it. She listen, Suella Braverman has always been so nakedly transparent, it's embarrassing. She has a craven lust for power, and she will do and say anything to get it and throw anybody and everybody under the bus to get it. There is nothing cerebral about that.
And she struck me as just really dim.
Yes,
just really, really dim. I don't know that she's got a craven lust for power quite, that's why I interrupted you, because I don't think she's got the wit to have a craven lust for power. I think she's a void, and people put things in and she doesn't kind of compute it, and then they just come out again.
You see, I actually think that the craven lust for power comes in realising that after Boris Johnson, you don't really need to have that much about you. Boris Johnson, remember, who famously did interviews about issues on which he had no idea what he was talking about. He was asked, have you read the brief? No, I haven't read it. You don't necessarily have to be particularly cerebral to lead this country. We've had Dominic Raab in positions of seniority within the Tory High Command.
Dominic Raab!
Exactly. I mean, you're talking about a very, very, very low bar. So Suella Braverman, as you say, she doesn't strike me as particularly cerebral. She just knows what buttons to press in the culture war to get people afraid. And the politics of fear have been a trademark of Tory governments over many decades, and they've come back. And you're right, this country isn't broken because of multiculturalism. It's failing because of 13 years where everything that the government has touched has turned to ashes. Our health system, our rail system, our education system. The government, they've gamed the system. And Suella Braverman wants to preside over a government and presumably become Prime Minister of a country suffering from crises for which she has zero answers. And that's
a bit like a few others I can think of. So we've got, what do you think, everybody? Is there anybody out there who agrees with Suella and that what she said the other day seems reasonable, yesterday seems reasonable? Because when she was asked, with her background, was this really the right thing for her to be saying? Although, Darren and others have talked about their experience of racism growing up in the past few decades, Suella, who is roughly the same age, said she didn't really have any racism growing up, but she feels racism now because she's told how to think because of the colour of her skin, that she must kind of agree with a sort of a general happy with migration idea because of the colour of her skin, and she objects to that. And should she? I mean, maybe that is fair. I don't know, but it's the fact that I think perhaps, like you said, Darren, that the diversity in our government is only skin deep. And actually underneath, they're wealthy, well-to-do people who've never really experienced the lows of being in an ethnic minority, being more impoverished, finding it hard to get jobs, finding it hard to be well-educated. And therefore, they haven't had quite the same experience as many others might have done. But while many people might think this is just right-wing politics, right, it isn't. Actually, Winston Churchill wrote the United Nations Convention on Refugees, helped to write it, and he was about as Tory as they get, genuinely, right? Broke the arms of suffragettes when he was Home Secretary, or ordered his police to, I should say. But this has split the Tory party right down the middle. There's left and right wings here. Darren, I suppose there's a risk, isn't there, that if Suella becomes leader after Sunak, that she will basically be left with a rump of a party that's going to get decimated at the ballot box anyway. But she's really got to appeal to a very hard right part of it, which is basically, as one of our commenters was saying earlier, it's unelectable. The maths just isn't there for that kind of politics to appeal to a broad enough base to make it an electable party, which kind of turns her in a way into like the anti-Jeremy Corbyn, Corbyn in a blue skirt just at the other end of the spectrum, presiding over an unelectable extremist view of the world, which isn't going to gel with the rest of the country, although it does get people talking about the things that extreme wants to talk about. We did with Corbyn, didn't it?
It does. It does get people talking about it, and it gets people buying into the kind of fear that she intends to stoke. And I think she sees that there's merit in playing to that hard right element of the Tory party. Sunak did. If you remember the speech that Sunak gave, where he joked about his tan, and I remember at the time thinking, what am I watching here? But he knows that there is a supporter base that are stuck in a time warp, and she knows that too, and she knows that for her it is an effective strategy to play to that base. But I think as far as I certainly, I look at the response there has been from ordinary right-minded people to the kind of thing that she said yesterday. And there is still, mercifully, there are still great swathes of people who see this for what it is. And I certainly think as far as Suella is concerned, you're right. If she were to assume power, it would be over a Tory party split, a Tory party, a Tory party which is largely discredited. It's falling apart. We saw Alex Sharma become the latest individual to decide that he's had enough and he's going to ride off into the sunset. And I just think as far as she is concerned, I want to be able to say in a few years' time she's going to be an irrelevance, but my fear, is that the damage that she will have done by the time she exits stage left will be incalculable.
Yes, that's part of the thing, isn't it? I suppose, Corbyn got people talking about more radical politics on the left. She gets people talking about more radical policies on the right. There's a whole other ballpark going on there. Leslie says, I want to ask, I hear this a lot, that we take in fewer people than other countries, but can we make that as a reasonable comparison when some of those countries are bigger and have more space to house people? Our infrastructure isn't coping currently. We have sold off all our housing. haven't we? The social housing, which I can remember about 20 years ago, that was the row, that all the asylum seekers were in social housing. I can't get a house, kind of thing. We've sold it all off, so now they have to go in hotels, and we're not going to be able to put our own.
Do you know what, Susie? I'm so glad you said that, because I think that right there is a snapshot of the issue. The failings of the government are being remodeled to suggest that it's not their fault that we have that kind of issue, but it's the fault of the migrants. And just to point out the numbers that I was mentioning about, we take in fewer migrants, you hear this and hear that, they don't come from me. It's from the UNHCR Global Trends Report from last year. There are statistics that lay bare the fact that we take fewer people than, as I was saying before, France, than Germany, than Poland, than Turkey. And I think it is important for people to understand the truth, that there are all sorts of myths that the likes of Braverman peddled, so that people who only take a passing interest in the story but maybe don't look at the beef, read the detail, they'll go away and believe, as has been mooted, that there are people coming here determined to get a free house, a free flat, free this, free that, get everything paid for, and it's a myth.
Well, here's a fact for you, okay, Leslie. Turkey takes in 3.6 million. We've got 175,000 asylum seekers in this country at the moment. That is 4.8% of what Turkey has, which means they have 95.2% more than we do. And they do not have more space, more money. Turkey is poorer per head than we are. And although it's a much bigger country, a lot of it is mountains. And they can't just go and park an asylum seeker on a mountain and say, that'll do. And it's also worth remembering that many of our public services are staffed and operated and kept on the road by migrant workforces and populations and second generation migrants and so on, because without them, we wouldn't have even the infrastructure we do have. And if the infrastructure is buggered, look at the buggers who've done it. That's what I say.